With me in the studio, Billy Joubert, Director of the Tax Division in Deloitte. We're looking at the mini budget that was delivered by Finance Minister Pravin Gordhan yesterday. And just before the break, we got on to public spending. In your view, is government capable of containing public spending because it's been running rampant?
Well, I think that the Finance Minister certainly sent very strong messages around that. He sent messages around public service expectations in terms of wage increases, accountability for spending, and the skills that we need to spend effectively. So it's not going to be that easy because I think people have become used to. He was saying that in the past 3 years, the public service wage bill has gone from 35% to 40% of non-interest expenditure. So people have got used to getting these quite significant increases. And the reality is right now we simply can't afford them. So, and especially not if we're trying to create employment within the public sector. So I think he's got a battle on his hands.
I think he has. And that public expenditure obviously comes from taxes. Now, according to him, he said the government will consider policy measures to raise tax revenues if the economy fails to recover as predicted. They already have forecasted downwards their income as a result of VAT. If the economy fails to recover as predicted, were his words, what are the causes of that failure? Is that all external, or is it internal, or is it a mix?
I think it's a mixture. And I'm not an expert on this either, but I've read a lot that we have really missed out on the commodity booms. We've already discussed the possible reasons or some of the reasons for that. So certainly I think there are opportunities for us to try and make our economy function more efficiently. But by the same token, we are part of a world economy, and the world economy is battling, and we're doing better than a lot of countries. So I think the biggest single factor is the world economy, I would suggest.
Okay. But then if he needs taxes, where's he going to get them? Is he going to come to you and me?
Well, the money comes from three key places. 80% of our tax comes from three sources. The biggest one is individual tax, and that accounts for about 34% of our total tax collections. The second biggest is VAT, which accounts for about 27%. And the smallest of the three is corporate income tax, which is currently around about 19%. So that gives you a flavour. If we need significant extra money, that's where it's going to look.
Okay, but VAT's already dropping.
VAT, I don't think is dropping. You mean VAT collections are dropping?
VAT collections.
That was a specific problem. It was actually due to them underestimating the VAT refunds due at the end of the last financial year. Okay. So I don't think it's collections on an ongoing basis that are a problem. And one of the remarkable features actually is how most of the estimates have remained more or less unchanged. The big ones remained unchanged. Other smaller ones like customs duty and STC were slightly up. The gap between what we've collected so far and what we expect to collect for the year, or the gap is the 13 billion, and that's one specific problem. So I think that we can almost say we're breaking even at this point in terms of expectation.
Okay, then the other area is corporate tax. Can he afford to start pushing the corporates? Because surely he needs them to help him create employment and carry on.
Yes. I think just to stick with VAT quickly, because VAT's a very easy way to raise extra taxes, is to push the VAT rate up. That's not
very
likely.
Easy, but not very. It won't be loved by the nation.
Yeah, it's a tax partly on the poor. It's of course a tax on anyone who spends money. Yeah. But one of the people who would be carrying that tax is poor people. So I can't see the VAT going up to cover a general shortfall in tax collections. VAT could possibly go up for something like the NHI in due course, because the NHI is there to benefit primarily poorer people who don't get decent medical care at the moment. So VAT, I think, is pretty much off the table in terms of pushing up general tax revenues. Corporate income tax also, I think, is off the table because it's very anti-investor friendly. We are in a competitive environment where we're competing with other countries for investment. Our tax rate is relatively high, of 28%. It's not by no means a low tax rate. We are going to lose some tax revenue from corporates when STC is replaced with a dividends tax, and that's for a very specific reason, that foreign shareholders can claim relief from the dividends tax. So I think realistically, if tax rates were to go up, it's probably going to be the personal tax rate, and there it'll probably be towards the upper brackets. And again, I think it's important to emphasize the ANC has never put tax rates up, not in all the years that they've been in power. But of course, we are now in an extraordinary time. And I think that if it was desperate measures, it would probably be the top marginal rate that goes up.
Is there enough money there to bring into the fiscus?
Well, there's the biggest chunk of tax revenue comes from individuals, 34%. So probably the biggest, or the most productive place to look to push revenues up quickly is to the individual taxpayer base. There are problems with that as well. I mean, we have to compete not only for corporate investment, but also for skills, and that includes bringing skilled foreigners into South Africa, trying to encourage expat South Africans to come back. And if our individual tax rates become unaffordable by world standards, then we will scare people off. So, the government is aware of that. They've done certain things. One of the issues was foreigners coming in. When are they pulled into the South African CGT net? And a few years ago, they pushed that out from 3 years to 5 years because a lot of skilled expats were just leaving after 3 years. So, it's not as if it's a free-for-all in the individual space. But I do reckon that if the global downturn persists and if the effects on South Africa are drastic, that'll be the first place that they look for extra money.
One of the other issues that the minister addressed was inflation. Looking at headline consumer price index, expected to average 5% and remain below 6% for the next 3 years. What is this, Billy? How does this affect the rates? Because a lot of people would be sitting back and going, okay, well, are the rates going to stay the same? Are my home repayments going to stay the same and my car repayments because of this?
Well, I think the outlook on interest rates is pretty stable. I don't think there's any indication at this point that they're likely to go up or down. I think the biggest single factor which could affect that target rate of inflation is actually the exchange rate. Because when the rand drops against other currencies, inflation tends to go up. And the rand, of course, is very volatile. Recently, it's been trading in an extremely wide bracket. So in some senses, we want the rand to drop because it makes us more competitive for our exports. But on the other hand, that has an inflationary effect. So there are various variable factors which can potentially influence that inflation rate.
He also did speak about the difference in the export and the import market. And he's saying that over the next 3 years, the export market is going to be a lot less than the import market, which doesn't do a heck of a lot of good for his balance sheet.
Yeah, one of our problems is that 40% of our exports go to Europe, and Europe is battling. The picture in Europe is very uncertain at this point. So that puts a big chunk of our economy at risk. And I think that's one of the factors that makes it very hard for us to even sustain our current level of exports. One of the things we could try to do is export more to the new growing economies like China and India. But of course, we have an issue there with the competitiveness of our labor. So they're often very willing to take our raw materials, our commodities, but it's difficult for us to supply things that have been manufactured or improved in South Africa into those markets at competitive prices.
That manufacturing sector, how is it doing at the moment? And what needs to be done there? Because countless times on this show, people have said we've got to start pushing our manufacturing sector.
Yes, I think one of the reasons for saying that, of course, is that's a labor-intensive industry, and we need to create employment. Just from a tax point of view, the more people we have paying in employment, the more people we have paying tax.
Yeah.
Even if we were to say cut the corporate tax rate and have lower corporate collections, if we have more people employed, that might generate more tax revenue overall.
But you see, this is where I get mixed signals, Billy, because you get stories out about unemployment levels, and then you get stories out about car manufacturers starting to gear up in industrial zones, coming in from other countries. What's your feel here? Where are we going? Are we actually gearing up for good, or are we in a position where everything's in decline?
I think our motor industry is a special case because it gets special incentives. We have a history of manufacturing cars, we have skills, we have a well-developed infrastructure. So that these various factors enable us to compete with other destinations. I really do think that for other areas of manufacture, our wage bills are relatively high, and it's probably not realistic to think they're going to come down that drastically. There are special things like in the clothing manufacturing industry. There are ways of trying to contain it, but realistically, to expect that we'll ever become a low-wage destination is probably unrealistic. So we need to probably aim to go the other direction, to become a place with excellent skills, so that the people can really add the value that you need to justify those wages. And it's the recurring theme, I think, of our economy. We need the skills.
You touched on NHI a bit earlier. At this rate, can we afford it?
Well, it's a very open question because we don't at this stage yet know what it's going to look like. There are figures of billions thrown around in terms of what it could look like within 15 years' time. But the pilot project that was budgeted for in this document is only 20 million. Of course, 20 million is absolute chicken feed in the overall context of our budget. So I think in order to comment, what a colleague of mine at Deloitte actually said was we shouldn't see this as a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. It depends on what it looks like. We should all get involved to try and make it the best possible thing we can. I think there's no question that people in our public health system are treated in a terrible way, they need better service. How we achieve that, how much it costs, how we get involved, all of those will determine whether we can afford it or not and whether it's a good thing or not.
If there was one thing, if I now appointed you, let's say I'm President Zuma and I appointed you Minister of Finance and I said I want you to do one thing, what would that one thing be?
It would be exactly what Minister Gordon is trying to do, and that's cut wasteful expenditure and improve the effectiveness of our spending. I think that's what we need to do. You know, it's all very well looking for extra money, but we need as taxpayers and as South Africans to have the confidence that our money is being spent wisely.
I remember having an interview with former US President Bill Clinton about his 1992 campaign, and he said one of the notes that he had up, which he said he focused on all the time, read, "It's the economy, stupid." Maybe somebody should write that note and put it on President Zuma's desk as well, because it actually is all about the economy. That's what drives this entire nation. Billy Joubert, thank you very much for joining us this evening. Nice to have had you in the studio. You may have noticed your food bills going up and up and up. We look at security in our investments, but what about food security? That's the subject we're going to be touching on next week on Mansfield's Money Sense.